Hello and welcome back to this next part in this series of videos helping you set up your Asustor NAS right the very first time. And today we're going to talk about Plex Media Server. Sounds familiar, right? Well, that is something we've covered on the channel quite a lot over the years when it's come to testing different NAS systems, suggestions, guides, and getting the most out of it and more. And indeed, a little over a year ago, we actually did, I think it was around about 13 or 14 months ago now, our setup guide showing you how to set up Plex Media Server for the first time. But as you can see, that was an 11-minute video. It does cover everything with the setup. It doesn't go into tremendous detail. And if you want to make sure you have every box ticked and know exactly what you are doing and why, that's why this video exists. You can also utilize our NAS for Plex Media Server mistakes video here that goes through some of the errors a lot of you people make as well. But let's press straight on. We've already talked about a lot of their first-party media applications. What sets Plex apart? Well, Plex is stupidly popular. It's also incredibly universally supported and available on a multitude of different platforms, from iOS to Android to smart TVs to tablets. I mean, you can get clients for Plex on pretty much anything. And with Plex Media Server running on most things, having it running on a Asustor, Locker Store, Nimbus Store, or Flash Store will be very beneficial. So, what do we need to do? Number one, we have to make sure all of our multimedia, our TVs, our box sets, our movies, our music, all of it is on the NAS. We've gone through it in other videos prior to this one, but you can go ahead and either create those subfolders you can see here on the left-hand side of the screen. I've created one for music, I've created one for multimedia there, I've created one for video, and some of them are created by default when you install certain apps. And just go ahead and make sure that you've uploaded media to the correct folder for your needs. You can upload it directly, or you can drag and drop if you prefer. You can just grab a bunch of files if you like and just drag them directly into that interface there if you like. Just drag it in and then you can just upload it if you like. There's loads of ways to do it, but just make sure all of that data for the TV shows, movies and more are in shared folders. And again, you can create brand new shared folders here at the top if you like. Just click new shared folder and create a brand new one. Once you've done that, head into the App Center. From the App Center, go ahead and when you go to categories, or even just go straight to the search function, go ahead in the search function, just type the word Plex. Then scroll down to Plex Media Server. From there, go ahead and install this application. Now, an important area of note when you install this. One, do you want Plex to be able to be accessible from outside of your system? And that is to say, do you want Plex to be able to open up ports and access the internet? Now, you're probably going to need that to scrape metadata, to access a lot of the online resources that Plex uses. And if you don't grant it access, chances are that will limit its functionality. We'll go through later on some of the ways in which you can change some of the default settings to make it a great deal safer, but most users are probably going to need to enable port forwarding for letting external users communicate with their Plex Media Server system there. But if you're not comfortable doing that, you can untick that and use the Easy Connect system, as well as using third-party alternatives out there. Now, once it's installing, another thing I want to talk about real quick, we can go to Plex's own website. And once Plex is opened, what I want you to look at is this tab here at the top right, marked Plex Media Server Downloads. Now, the reason we're going into this is just to highlight something about Plex and NAS. This applies to all of the NAS brands, by the way, not just Asustor. But when you are going for Plex Media Server, and again, that's not the client tool, that's just Plex to watch the media. Plex Media Server is what you use for the server that's hosting all the media. Select, for example, Asustor in this case. Select Choose Package. For an Intel-powered system, you want an Intel 64-bit there, but every other Asustor system currently uses a Realtek ARM V8 or V7. Once you select that there, it will ask you to download a file. Now, you might be wondering, why am I doing this if I'm already installing it on the Asustor? Well, look down here and you can see we are running version 1.40.07998. Remember that number, 7998. Because right now, we are installing a very different version. We are installing 7328. That's a different version to the one that they're offering there. Why is that? Well, the verification when files are submitted to be listed in the app centers on the respective NAS brand platforms, you know, the amount of updates that come out, the number of loader packages that come out need to be verified and tested. The result is there can be disparity between the available Plex Media Server package that's available from Plex versus the one that's listed on their app center. Later on, I'll show you exactly how to update manually, but just keep that in mind when installing Plex, that it might be behooving to you and more beneficial to download direct from Plex. Download that application, then go into App Center here, go into manual in here at the bottom, zoom out, manual installation, select browse, find the file you've downloaded and install it that way. Now, we've installed Plex Media Server, and before we go further, it's worth returning to that subject of access and security. Why are we talking about it? Well, when you do establish connection for Plex to access your NAS, you don't want to give it too much access, do you? You don't want to let, for example, it have power user status to access the rest of your system, storage, and even control. Now, to make sure that isn't the case, there's a few things you can do. Number one, go into access control. From here, you can either ensure that the account that's going to be accessing Plex has more limited scope and privileges and access, or you can create a brand new user dedicated to Plex. Give that user a name, Plex, give them a login. And once you've created that login, go ahead, add an email if you want, but click next. From that, you want to define the roles rather than let it be an admin with all of the power. And then from there, define not only which group it's in, and therefore that can be an overarching power control, but you can decide which folders it can access. For example, we'll let it access our media for Plex, but nothing else. But you can also ensure that it can only read the data. So it can only access the videos and footage and music and whatever, but it can't write, it can't amend, it can't change. Now, that is a double-edged sword, because as good as that sounds, to ensure that the Plex account and the account you're giving to Plex to do all this can't really cause much damage, some Plex services actually create data. There's offline and early transcoding. There is creating a lot of the metadata. There is storing local data, statistical data and log data. And some of that data either needs to, or by default, will be in the same directory as the media itself. So if you don't give it read and write access in those scenarios, that can be a problem. So just be aware of what level of access you're giving and the pros and cons there of it. Also, you're able to see different apps that are on your Asustor NAS, and you can assign access. So you can set it up that this Plex account we're creating can not only access that multimedia and even limit it to read only, but you can also ensure that it can only access Plex. It can't even access the file manager effectively. And that's it. Now we've got that Plex user that can only access that data. And you can choose to do it that way to ensure Plex has only got that access. Heading back into the user access control, this time go to shared folders. From there, select the folders that your media resides within. In my case, there is my media folder there, or you've got it distributed across different folders. From there, click edit, and you can change how and what can access these folders. And the same goes if you want to go for intermediary folders as well. You can change who can access it in terms of Windows and SMB, but also go to the access rights for that folder. And instead of local user, you can go to local user groups and therefore control who and what can access it. Either way, either one of those options will allow you to control the level of access and scope of access of the account that's using Plex, and indeed Plex itself. But now Plex has been installed, let's make our way into Plex Media Server. It will appear here on your desktop and range of available apps. Click that option. It opens up in a brand new tab. And if you haven't already logged into Plex Plex account, or you haven't created one, you'll be invited to create a Plex account. The reason you need to do that is you need to associate and bond a Plex account with this NAS. Now, you can do this with a free Plex account. You don't need a Plex pass. You don't need a paid account to have Plex running on a NAS. Plex passes advantages in most cases, but not all, apply more to the client side than they do to the server side. Once you've created your account with or without a Plex pass, log in and then click sign in, and now it will bond the Plex account with the Asustor NAS. If this page doesn't refresh, and after 30 to 60 seconds you see a black screen, simply refresh the page and it will re-ping the Plex server to re-establish that connection. From here, click got it, then name your NAS. Then, if you want to allow access to configure the Plex account externally, tick that box, and we've already discussed already about remote access. And then from there, get ready to establish connections between the individual types of media, from movies to photos to music and more, with the Plex database and the Plex scanning and metadata scraping, because that is what turns a big pile of folders on your Asustor NAS into your own version of Netflix, your own version of Disney Plus. So click Add Library. From there, select your first directory, Films, select Add Folder, select Browse for Media folder, and select the folder that your media resides in. I'm doing so, and there are my movies right there. Click Add. Remember, your directories will be different from mine depending on how you set up your device. Then select Advanced. Then make sure you've got Plex Movie as the scanner. But depending on the rarity of your media, the bespokeness of your media, and whether some of it, particularly for foreign art house stuff, it is recommended to select the movie database for harder to find stuff, but more mainstream content, I would use the Plex Movie agent to crawl for metadata. But again, you can use lots of different options there. Again, a lot of these options below, some of which are locked behind Plex Pass, will allow you to add trailers, have limitations of certification, different kinds of trailers to be utilized, how things are going to be displayed, adult content, subtitles. All of these are configurable options that will be applied to the entire movie catalog there. Now just repeat those steps with different kinds of media. Bear in mind when it comes, for example, to TV media, when you're adding TV media, I would personally recommend selecting a different database scraping. I would recommend leave it at Plex TV series, but change this one to the TV database, as I tend to find better results with the TV database. When it comes to music media, go ahead and repeat those exact same steps, and then from there, within the music data, ensure that you are crawling a good database to get media for your albums. Again, more selective and rarer artists and personal cover art can be found on Last.fm, but the Plex Media Scanner is still pretty darn good. And if you've already got an iTunes database, you can actually import a lot of that data and synchronize it as well. Let's fast forward to when I've added a bunch of folders. Once you've selected all of the folders that you want, go ahead and click Next. It will then invite you to download individual applications for your mobile device, your tablet device, and more, and ensure that you can enjoy your Plex Media server experience via dedicated Plex client tools. But I will highlight that you don't necessarily always have to use Plex to enjoy Plex Media, but we'll get onto that later on. Once that's done, it will now start crawling the internet and using those databases we selected to provide our cover art. It will provide information with regards to the name, the casting, reviews, background information, even trailers and more information that you want to add there. And it will apply it to TV shows and movies alike. If you find that the databases it's crawling from aren't covering everything you want, so for example, if we go in to our NAS here, and we go into TV shows, and if you're finding that gaps are present and not all of the metadata is being scraped, give it a moment, as it can take a little bit of time depending on the scale of the database. But if in doubt, you can go ahead and do one of two things. Number one, you can rescan the library. 2, you can use the upgrade library option, which is a paid extra from Plex, where they use a newer and more fulfilled database of metadata. I personally don't recommend that. You can refresh all the metadata, or finally, you can edit this directory and change the scanner. So if you wish, you can switch over to the movie database or the Plex series database to see if it can find more details, and then re-crawl for that metadata to see if it can find any gaps in your existing layout of multimedia there. Again, there's pros and cons to each, and depending on the rarity of your media, you may get more or less results. And once again, when it comes to updates, on the top right of the screen here, if there is an update available for your Plex Media Server version running on your Asustor NAS, you will see it here, and it'll let you know that there is a server update. Again, clicking that will go to the downloads, which will result in you downloading the latest version, which means you'll have to go back into your device, then go into the App Center. From the App Center, and I know we've been through this, but just as a reminder, go in, go to Management, go to Manual Install, browse, find the thing you downloaded, and install the update. Just bear in mind that by installing the update, that will have to stop Plex as it needs to install and then restart Plex. But all the changes you've made to shared folders and accounts and all of the metadata will remain exactly the same. It won't delete any of the work you've done. It will merely update Plex to the latest version. Next, we've got to talk about some of the tweaks, improvements, and security changes you should make to your Plex Media Server on the back end to get the most out of it, but also to ensure that if you do this at the beginning, you never have to revisit this topic. Find the NAS here on the web browser, click the three dots, select Manage Server, then select Settings. From Settings, we've got a lot of options open to us. The first one, and probably the biggest one that we should talk about, is to do with transcoding. Select the transcoder option here on the bottom left. Now, depending on whether you are running a Plex Media Server, a Plex Pass account, the options you've got afforded to you will be slightly different. Also, the Asustor NAS you choose to use will affect the changes as well. What do I mean by all of that? Well, for a start, what is transcoding or conversions? Nice and simple. Let's say, for example, you are watching your Plex Media Server device. You're here, you're streaming your media, there's our NAS here, and you go, do you know what? I own an 8K movie. This 8K movie called Nightscape. This 8K movie here, when we look at the picture quality, is absolutely huge, and it just isn't able to be played. It's too dang large. The same goes if we select another 8K. This one will probably play, but still nonetheless, it will probably play at a reduced rate or not at all. It just doesn't have the oomph in the bonnet to get the job done. Now, why is this all important? We've got one that we can actually show now. Well, a big part of that is that the media itself is too big. It's too big for the client device, it's too big for the connection, or it's a licensing problem with the compression technique or the codec. So the system will need to convert that file, otherwise known as transcoding or conversions, to change the file to an acceptable medium where, for example, this 8K file I might be able to watch on my phone. Now, the level to which you can change that file is based on two things. Number one, if you've got a Plex Pass, because if you have a Plex Pass, it means you can take advantage of something called hardware transcoding, which is when, if your CPU has a dedicated graphical element, otherwise known as integrated graphics, it can use that part of the CPU to get the job done. Now, as you can see, at the moment, it's set to automatic. If I select Make My CPU Hurt, this means a couple of things. Number one, it means that rather than when I need to convert those big files, it requires the CPU's whole base level power to do the job in a very inefficient and overly consuming fashion, it now utilizes just a part of the CPU dedicated to this job, that integrated graphics, the embedded graphics, the transcoding engine, if you will, or the conversion engine, an option that will only be afforded to you via Plex Pass. But on top of that, it will also mean that when we are utilizing that part of the system to do the job, we're utilizing less power and resources across the whole system. And that means we can do more playbacks, more backups, and ultimately have more resources for every other operation taking place right now on this system. Now, your Asustor NAS, if it has an Intel Celeron, Pentium Intel Core, N95, N100, N300, or indeed any mainstream Intel CPU that has integrated graphics, then chances are that integrated graphics can be selectable here via the use of hardware transcoding, and you can select which option that CPU has if there is the option to select it. For example, there are some servers out there that have an integrated graphics CPU and a graphics card. Sometimes you want to use the integrated graphics, or when you really need it, you can use the graphics card. Hardware transcoding selection here allows you to choose which one is more appropriate to your needs. But what if you don't want to mess around with transcoding? What if you just want to access your Plex media on the local area network and you don't want to have to mess around with Plex apps, or your device is too old to actually access and install a Plex app? Well, luckily, DLNA and UPnP, Digital Living Network Alliance, and Universal Plug and Play are supported on Plex Media Server. Go to the DLNA tab, select Enable DLNA Server, go ahead and click Save Changes, and now this NAS will be accessible and findable on the local area network as a media server. So rather than using a Plex app, you can use a PC or a TV that supports network playback over DLNA or UPnP, a very common feature these days. Select Connect to a media server, and now your Asustor NAS will appear, as you see here, as a Plex media server device. Double click, add it as a drive, just like a Map Network drive, and just like these other Plex servers, you can access the full content of that system over the local area network, breaking it all the way down to the filters if they are applied thanks to Plex. Talking about those filters and that metadata scraping of Plex, it's also worth remembering that over time you might be downloading new TV shows, uploading new music and photos. You might be downloading and uploading new multimedia, new movies and TV shows to your Plex media server. You want to make sure that the Plex media server engine is not only aware of these changes to make sure it can list the media as quick as possible, but also ensures that new metadata is being scraped, new information is being garnered, and as quickly as possible, any gaps in all of your thumbnails and all of your information for what the details that are on your Plex server are updated. There's two ways to do this. Number one, select the Library tab here on the left, and from there, put a tick in Scan My Library automatically. This will mean that if any changes happen to the folders that the Plex Media Server software is connected to, in my case the media folder, the result is it will automatically constitute a rescan, and any new media that may have been uploaded to it that actually caused the change will then be added. Make sure that you click Save every time. But moreover, head over to the Scheduled Tasks. From here, you can select New Tasks. Now, the automatic scan should take care of adding any new media to your database. But what about dead media? What about erroneous data? What about metadata that you don't need anymore? What if you move data around or create new databases or watch lists and more, and you need that updated? Well, you can set a schedule to happen every single day, say at 1 AM, and then from there it will refresh all of that data as needed. It'll also remove the deadwood. It won't remove any data that is still useful and intact, but it will get rid of old data and also stay on top of any periodic changes on your Plex media server. Finally, let's talk about access, because a lot of you are going to be utilizing access to your Plex Media Server account for friends and family. Now, let's talk a little bit about how you add people, but also how do you remove them, or at least clip their wings. Well, to add people, go to the Manage Library Access tab, and again, you don't even need to give them access to your Asustor NAS, which is really important. Go in and then grant library access. Add their email account, and if their email account is already associated with a Plex account, they will get an invitation to add this Plex account to their Plex. As you can see there, I've got several servers listed on the left-hand side of the screen, and so will they. They can flick between multiple media servers in the same way you flick between different streaming services. But moreover from that, what if you give access to someone for your Plex Media Server multimedia and they're abusing it? They're giving it to their friends. They're adding it to 10 devices. They're oversaturating your network. Well, for that, head into Authorized Devices. And from here, this shows you via this the Plex account that is associated with this Plex Media Server, a list of every connected device using those credentials, whether it is a server or a client. And you can just go ahead and kill them off. You can just remove them, and then they're gone. So if someone is utilizing that information in a way that you don't like, you can go ahead and start removing those people one by one. And finally, on the subject of oversaturation, I also think it's worth briefly touching on the ways of managing your bandwidth on a system that's utilized by Plex and a bunch of other services. What do I mean by that? Well, when you've got several users accessing your TV shows and your movies, your bandwidth is only a finite amount of space. Think of water pressure in your home. It's one thing to have a lovely shower with all the water coming out of the pipes, but if someone's running a tap downstairs while running a big wash on the washing machine, while washing the dishes, while running the dishwasher, while washing a car, the water pressure fails and everybody's losing. No one gets good pressure in that scenario because it's being shared out too much for all those different services. So what you can do on any NAS, and this includes of course the Asustor, if you've got multiple physical connections, you can bind Plex to a single LAN. So in this case, we could bind, if we choose, to this specific physical connection. And if your Asustor NAS has multiple physical ports, what you can do is ensure that every bit of traffic associated with Plex goes through that physical connection. Then you can take more than one cable at the back of your Asustor NAS if there are more than one physical LAN port, connect multiple ports to your router or to your network switch, and then ensure that you have one lane dedicated to Plex Media Server and the others to backups, to surveillance, to whatever. Now, another advantage of this that is worth touching on is it not only ensures that that traffic doesn't impede yours, but also yours doesn't impede theirs. When it comes to backups, for example, and those that are utilizing the backup services with the Asustor system, a lot of those are incremental. They are differential. They are backups that can take place over a long amount of time and sometimes a lot smaller than others as they only amend the changes. That means that smaller breakages of data being transferred and there's a pause won't really be noticed. With multimedia, if you're watching a movie and you are data is being exchanged your way and suddenly it stops coming, you've only got the buffer time. Once that buffer time runs out, it's going to freeze, it's going to distort, it's going to pixelate, it's going to fail. That's why having a dedicated Ethernet port to Plex ensures a much wider degree of bandwidth to these services while not impinging others. But there you go. That is how to install Plex the perfect way first time on your Asustor NAS system. I hope you've enjoyed this. This isn't the last part in this series, and I hope you stay tuned for the others. Otherwise, if you need further support, as always, the free advice section over on NAS Compares and the NAS Builder. So the NAS Builder, if you need it, will ensure that, for example, if you are looking to get, let's go nuts and say 20 terabytes of storage on an 8-bay NAS, you want to have at least one disk of failure protection, and you've got £1,000 to play with, and you want to make sure you use it for Plex, you can go ahead for 0 to 1 to 5 users and find out, is there a NAS that will supply that? And by our database, there hasn't. But you can go ahead and either up that budget to 2,000, go again, and this time we find that there are several more NASs. Some of them might require a GPU card, some of them not. The NAS Builder is designed for you to put in exactly the configuration of the NAS system you need and allow you to decide what kind of solution. You can even compare these solutions by ticking several and then create a compare table to tell you what's good and what's bad about all of them. And all of this from this single tool. When you're ready, go ahead and click the buy buttons here on the right hand side, and it will take you to Amazon, B&H, AliExpress and different retailers listed on the page. And if you're going to go buy from those anyway, using those links results in a small amount of money come to me and Eddie, a small fee, and it allows us to keep making these guides and other videos. Apart from that, use our free advice section if you need further support. Discord, community support forums we recommend, our own 3 to 5 day working day completely free support section, and expedited support. Alternatively, you can hire us via Zoom for a consultation or our membership program to give even further expedited support, or even use our community forum. And don't forget to use all of the other guides we've created on the subject of Plex and Asustor. I'll see you next time.